How dare you show me mercy? I don't want it!
It did not begin with violence, it began with a warning. Her voice was sharp, trembling with something more than anger. Touch me again, and you die. She meant it, I could see it in her eyes, and yet, standing there in that cold moment, I felt something else beneath the threat, something broken, guarded, and dangerous in a courtroom. This is not a fast story. It's a slow, dark, emotional one. A story about tension, restraint, and the thin line between fear and curiosity. About two people standing too close to something they don't fully understand. There is danger here, but not the kind that explodes all at once. It creeps, it waits, it watches what you choose to do next. I am telling this story in my own voice, the way I remember it, step by step, breath by breath, not to shock you, but to pull you into the silence between movements, into the space where a single action can change everything, even when you think you are in control. I didn't expect what happened after her threat. I didn't expect how one small decision would unravel everything I thought I knew. And it all started right here, with her hand shaking and heartbeat slowing, and me making a choice I can never take back. This story is written and structured by me. I personally added the visual spacing, subtitles, and color grading using AI tools only as assistants, not as replacement for my creative work.
Moonlight makes liars out of everything. It turns puddles into ink, turns brick into bone, turns a man's steady hands into something that looks like guilt. It paints the city's alleyways with silver and refuses to show you what's inside the shadows. Only what the shadows are willing to confess. That night, the mist came in low, curling around my boots like it wanted to be carried somewhere warmer. The streets of Vesperglass were quiet in the way a theater goes quiet right before the curtain lifts. Every seat filled, every breath held, the whole room waiting for a single word to make the story real. I found her at the mouth of a dead-end alley behind St. Maro's Cathedral, where old stones kept secrets better than priests ever did. She was already facing me when I stepped into the thin spill of moonlight. To, wrapped in a coat dark as spilled wine. Hair black enough to drink the light. Skin too pale to belong to any living bloodline I'd ever shaken hands with. And her eyes. Her eyes were not merely bright. They were a warning system, a set of flares launched from inside a storm. A soft crimson glow, not theatrical, not decorative, functional. Like the glow on the tip of a cigarette in a blackout. Like the last ember in a fire that could come roaring back if you gave it air. She did not blink when she spoke. She didn't have to. Touch me again, she said, voice steady with a violence that didn't need volume, and you die. Some threats are shouted because they need help being believed. Hers didn't. I stopped close enough to feel the cold that radiated from her like winter had chosen her body as a home. Close enough to count the fine scars at her throat, thin white lines hidden under the collar when she moved, proof that even monsters get cut. I should have stepped back. I should have nodded, apologized, and retreated into the part of the city that belonged to the living. But I didn't come to Vesperglass to do what I should. I came because people were disappearing. Because the councilman whispered cult, the police whispered gang, and the clergy whispered curse, and all of them were lying to cover the one truth they couldn't afford to name, that something ancient had returned to the city, and it was taking what it wanted. My name is Elias Crow. I used to investigate ordinary crimes. Money, jealousy, violence with a human pulse behind it. Then I survived something I wasn't supposed to survive, and my life split down the middle. On one side, the daylit world of paperwork and polite lies. On the other, Vesperglass at night, where every myth has a heartbeat and every heartbeat is negotiable. That woman, no, that presence, was called Seraphine by those who prayed to her and the Red Queen by those who feared her. And she stood there now like a blade that had decided to pretend it was a person. Her lips were slightly parted as if she just shouted, though her voice had been low. The anger in her eyes was real, but it wasn't simple. There was something trapped behind it, like a second expression trying to break through, shock, maybe, or grief, or a hunger that didn't know what it wanted to eat. My hand lifted slowly. Not toward her throat, not toward her face. Those would have been invitations to die. Toward her wrist. Her gloved hand twitched, almost too fast to see, as if she'd meant to strike and stopped at the last possible moment. A fraction of hesitation, tiny as a crack in glass, but enough to prove the glass could break. Elias, she said, tasting my name like she hated that she knew it. Do you think you're brave? I think you're lying, I answered and felt the air tighten between us. Not about the killing. About what you want. A laugh almost happened in her throat, but she strangled it before it became sound. My fingers reached her wrist again. Warm leather under my fingertips. Beneath it, cold skin. Under that cold, something else. A pulse, impossibly faint, like a ghost trying to imitate life. Her eyes widened. Not in rage. In something like being remembered. Mist curled between us. The moonlight cut a sharp line down the bridge of her nose. Her mouth opened, not to threaten this time, but as if her body had forgotten what came next when someone touched her gently. And that was when I understood the first rule of surviving the supernatural. The most dangerous creatures are rarely dangerous because they enjoy killing. They're dangerous because they've forgotten how to stop. I held her wrist, not tight, not possessive, just present. A touch that said, I see you. I'm still here. I'm not afraid of what you've been taught you are. Her voice came out lower, rougher. If you do not release me, she whispered, I will make your death a lesson. I've already had lessons, I said. I'm here for answers. The glow in her eyes flickered. Rage dimmed. Something older surfaced. Then ask, she said. I did, I replied. And you threatened me. Now I'm asking again, with my hand on the truth. Who is taking the missing? For a moment she looked away as if the alley wall could offer her a better lie. Then she did the last thing I expected. She didn't pull away. She leaned closer. So close the mist between us dissolved, so close I could smell iron under her perfume, blood, but old blood, dried into memory. So close I could see that her lashes trembled like she was holding something back with every muscle. Not who, she said. What? The word landed like a stone dropped into deep water. Her gaze returned to mine and sharpened, not with threat now but with urgency, the kind you only see when someone has stopped pretending they're in control. There is a gate beneath St. Maros, she said. A mouth in the earth. It has opened again. I swallowed. You're saying the cathedral is built over? A hunger, she cut in. An engine. A god if you prefer the older language. It is taking people because it is waking. And it is waking because someone is feeding it. Her jaw flexed. The edge of a fong flashed briefly when she spoke the next words. And they are using my name as the knife. I felt my pulse in my throat. So you're not doing it. I have done things, she said, and the confession carried centuries inside it. But not this. A siren wailed far away. Somewhere above us, a rooftop pigeon startled and flapped into the night like a torn piece of paper. I still had her wrist in my hand. And now I understood the thumbnail moment of my life, the frame that would look like danger to anyone watching from a safe distance. The fearless man touching the wrathful queen. But the truth in the frame was worse and softer at once. She wasn't furious that I touched her. She was furious that it mattered. Because in the world Seraphine came from, tenderness was always the first step toward betrayal. I loosened my grip, not releasing her, just giving her space to choose. Tell me what you are, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Do you truly want to know? I'm already here, I said. I already reached. The glow in her gaze deepened, then steadied. She inhaled, unnecessary maybe but habitual. A ritual for people who used to need breath. I am what your stories call vampire, she said, and the word sounded tired in her mouth, like a costume she'd been forced to wear too long. But that is a poor translation. I am one of the sable court, born under a black star, altered by a blood covenant beneath a dying moon. We are not undead. We are interrupted. Interrupted, I repeated. Her head tilted slightly. Stopped before the end. Held in a state between the last heartbeat and the next. A chill ran through me and not from the night. And the gate, I said. What's beneath the cathedral? She stared past me as if she could see through stone and earth. The choir, she whispered. A buried intelligence. It sings in hunger. It cannot move so it pulls. It cannot speak so it borrows mouths. It cannot touch so it makes others touch for it. I tried to picture it and failed. My imagination, trained on guns and knives and human cruelty, could not make room for a thing like that without breaking. And who's feeding it? I asked. Her gaze snapped back to mine. A man you once trusted, she said. A priest who hates gods. A councilman who wants power. A detective who wants to stop feeling helpless. My skin prickled. Which one is it? I demanded. She looked at my hand on her wrist. Then she said quietly, all of them. The choir doesn't need one servant. It needs a city. It needs a system. The mist thickened, swirling as if the alley itself had exhaled. I forced myself to stay steady. Then we stopped the system. A slow smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, almost amused, almost sad. You speak like someone who believes systems can be stopped, she said. They can, I answered. If you cut the right artery. Her eyes searched my face, hunting for the weakness in my confidence. She found something else instead, the stubborn refusal to look away. A long silence stretched between us, filled with distant city noise and the nearer sound of her coat shifting with the smallest movements. Finally she said, if I help you, you will be marked. I already am, I told her. You will be hunted by my kind. Let them come. You will be hunted by your own. I smiled faintly and the smile was tired. They've been hunting me since I started asking the wrong questions. Her expression tightened, and for a second the queen cracked open and the woman behind her showed through, someone exhausted by eternity, someone who wanted to put down the crown and just be touched without consequences. Then the crack sealed. She pulled her wrist gently from my hand, not a rejection but a decision. A boundary. I will show you the gate, she said. But you must promise me something. What? When the choir speaks with my voice, she said, you will not believe it. A heavier silence followed. The kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat because it might be the last uncomplicated thing you get to keep. I promise, I said. Seraphine's eyes softened just a fraction. And Elias, she added, if you break that promise, it won't be my hand that kills you. She turned and began to walk down the alley, and I fell into step beside her as if that was always how this story was supposed to go, human and monster moving through mist toward something that wanted both of us swallowed. Behind us, the moonlight kept its distance. Ahead, the cathedral waited like a mouth with its teeth hidden. St. Maro's Cathedral did not look like a place where evil would hide. That was the trick. In daylight it was all stained glass and philanthropy. It fed the poor and married the hopeful and buried the broken. It was the kind of building that made you believe the world still had structure. At night, the cathedral became what it truly was, a monument to secrets. Its spires cut into the sky like accusations. Gargoyles clung to the edges with mouths open, eternally screaming warnings nobody listened to anymore. The stained glass, unlit, turned into dark mirrors reflecting nothing but the watcher's own doubt. Seraphine led me to a side door sealed with ironwork older than the city's charter. No guard waited there, no priest, no camera. The absence was deliberate like a blind spot engineered into the world. She placed her hand against the iron. The metal should have been freezing. It warmed under her palm. I watched the mechanism shift without gears turning, watched the lock unlatch as if the cathedral itself recognized her. You have access, I said quietly. I have history, she corrected. The door opened into a narrow stairwell spiraling down. The air that came out was not cool, it was stale, ancient, like the breath of a room that had been holding itself shut for centuries. As we descended, my flashlight beam trembled across stone walls carved with symbols that weren't Latin, weren't any human alphabet I'd seen. They looked like music written for eyes instead of ears, curved, repeating patterns that made my head ache when I tried to follow them. Seraphine moved without hesitation. She did not need light, but she stayed close enough to me that I could feel the faint brush of her coat against my arm when the stairwell narrowed. It was impossible not to notice the way she controlled her body. Every step was deliberate, every movement measured. Like she was always aware of how quickly she could become lethal and always trying not to. I broke the silence first. How long have you been in this city? I asked. She didn't look at me. Long enough to watch it rebuild itself on top of the same rot. That's not a number. A number makes it sound like I counted, she said. You don't count when you're trying to forget. I let that settle. The stairwell seemed to deepen in response, as if the cathedral enjoyed discomfort. What happened to you? I asked finally. Seraphine's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she would refuse. Then she said, I was made into a symbol. The words were simple. The bitterness behind them was not. In my time, she continued, they needed a queen for their court, a figure to blame, to worship, to fear. They needed someone to carry the violence so everyone else could call themselves clean. We reached a landing. A single candle burned in a niche, impossibly fresh. The flame did not flicker. Who lit that? I asked, uneasy. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. No one. The candle's flame bent slightly toward us as if leaning in to listen. My skin crawled. We continued downward. The deeper we went, the more the air changed. A faint vibration started under my feet. At first I thought it was distant traffic. Then I realized it had rhythm. Not mechanical. Organic. Like a heartbeat too big for anybody. I stopped. Seraphine stopped with me. You feel it? It's pulsing, I said. It's waking, she replied. A memory surfaced then, uninvited, one of my first cases after I'd crossed into the night world. A missing girl, 15, taken from her bedroom without signs of struggle. The only clue had been a faint humming in the walls, like someone singing through plaster. The mother had said it was the house settling. It hadn't been. We descended another flight and the stairwell opened into a crypt corridor lined with sealed doors. Each door had a name carved above it: bishops, benefactors, saints. People who had been important enough to deserve private darkness. Seraphine passed them without a glance. At the end of the corridor stood a door unlike the others. No name, no ornamentation, just a slab of stone with a circular indentation in the center. A palm print. Seraphine lifted her hand. I caught her wrist gently, not the same bold gesture as in the alley, but enough to stop her. She looked at me, irritation flashing. What? She hissed. You said the choir borrows mouths, I said. What if it borrows hands too? Her expression shifted, annoyance giving way to reluctant respect. You are not wrong, she said. She pulled a thin blade from somewhere inside her coat. It was not steel. It was black as if forged from cooled night. She pressed it to her fingertip and drew a single line. Blood-welled, dark, almost shimmering in the low light. The sight of it made the air feel heavier. She did not look at the blood with hunger. She looked at it with disgust. She smeared the blood over the palm indentation. The stone door shuddered. The sound rolled out, not a grind of rock but a chord. Like a choir of voices exhaling at once. My stomach dropped. The door slid open. Beyond was a chamber so old the architecture had forgotten human angles. The walls curved in unnatural ways. The ceiling arched like a ribcage. In the center, a circular pit descended into deeper darkness, its edges carved with those same musical symbols. And from the pit rose the sound. Not singing exactly. More like many throats trying to agree on a single note and failing. The air tasted metallic. The mist followed us down here, thinning into a low fog that clung to the floor like fear. I stepped closer to the pit and aimed my flashlight downward. The beam disappeared too quickly, swallowed by depth. Seraphine's voice came beside my ear, soft and sharp at once. Do not look too long, she warned. It learns faces. I stepped back instinctively. Show me, I said, keeping my voice steady. Show me how it takes people. Seraphine's eyes tracked the symbols carved around the pit. It calls, she said. Not with sound you hear, but with need you recognize. It makes you think of someone you lost. Or something you crave. It makes you believe the pit holds the answer. My throat tightened. And if you step closer? It touches you from below, she said. Not with hands. With promises. With memories shaped like hands. A chill crawled up my spine. Who opened it? I asked again. Who started feeding it? Seraphine's gaze hardened. A man named Father Cauldron. The name hit like a punch. I knew Father Cauldron. Not personally but enough. He was a priest with a public reputation for compassion and a private reputation for ambition. He had founded shelters, built clinics, become a beloved figure. Exactly the kind of man people trusted to keep darkness out. What does he want? I asked. Seraphine's laugh was humorless. To kill God. To replace it. To become it. Humans are wonderfully flexible in their delusions. I stared into the pit again, careful this time, like looking at a predator through glass. And the missing, I said. He sacrifices them? He offers them, she corrected. As if the choir is a mouth and the people are bread. The sound from the pit swelled slightly, like it had heard its name. Then, impossibly, the singing shifted. A voice threaded through it. Singular. Familiar. My own name, spoken softly. Elias. I froze. Seraphine's hand shot out and grabbed my shoulder, yanking me back hard. Do not answer, she hissed. The voice continued, gentle, intimate. It sounded like my sister. My sister had been dead for 10 years. Elias, the pit whispered, you've been so alone. My chest tightened until breathing hurt. Seraphine stepped in front of me, blocking the pit with her body as if she could shield me from sound. Her eyes glowed brighter. You are not him, she said to the darkness. You are not allowed his grief. The singing faltered, then surged again, irritated. And then the pit did something worse. It laughed. Not out loud. Inside my skull. A ripple of cold amusement that made my teeth ache. Seraphine's jaw clenched. She looked back at me, and in her expression I saw the cost of what she was doing, standing between me and something older than both of us, something that knew how to use a wound like a key. It already knows, I whispered. Yes, she said. Now you understand why it must be stopped. The air thickened. The candlelight in the corridor behind us went out with a faint pop, as if someone had pinched the flame. In the sudden darkness beyond my flashlight I felt something shift. Footsteps. Not ours. Seraphine's head snapped toward the door. Someone is coming, she said. I drew my gun without thinking. The metal felt absurdly small in that chamber. The door at the corridor entrance moved. Slowly. A figure stepped through, a man in priest's robes, carrying a lantern that gave off no warmth. His face was gentle, kind, framed by gray hair and a neatly kept beard. Father Cauldron. He smiled when he saw me as if we'd arranged to meet for coffee. Detective Crow, he said warmly. I was wondering when curiosity would bring you here. Seraphine's posture changed instantly. She became stiller, sharper, as if every muscle had been rewired for violence. Cauldron's gaze slid to her and his smile widened. And you, he said, voice dripping with satisfaction. My reluctant saint. Seraphine's eyes flashed. Do not call me that. Cauldron stepped closer, lantern held high. The lantern's light did not illuminate the chamber. It seemed to drink it, making the shadows deeper. You came back, he said to Seraphine, almost tender. After all these years. I knew the choir would bring you home. My stomach turned. You're feeding it, I said, gun trained on him. You're taking people. Cauldron looked at my weapon like it was a child's toy. I am saving them, he corrected. The city is sick with false gods. Money, power, desire. The choir is simply honest hunger. And hunger can be directed. He turned his lantern slightly toward the pit. The singing swelled, affectionate now, like a dog recognizing its master. You're insane, I said. Cauldron sighed as if disappointed. Such a small word for such a large truth. He looked back at me. You touched her, he observed, and there it was, interest sharper than his warmth. How brave. Or how foolish. Seraphine's lips curled, fangs showing. If you come closer, she said, I will tear out your throat. Cauldron chuckled softly. Yes, that's the Seraphine they fear. But not the Seraphine you are. His gaze flicked to her wrist, where I'd touched her earlier, where her glove now hid that memory. The pit sang louder. My head started to ache. The symbols around the rim seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Cauldron's voice lowered. The choir wants you both, he said. You, detective, because you are full of grief. And you, Seraphine, because you are full of blood. Seraphine's body tensed. And because, Cauldron continued almost kindly, you are full of something you pretend you don't feel anymore. Her eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? He smiled. Touch, he said. The word landed like a match near gasoline. My mind flashed back to the alley, the shock on her face when I touched her wrist, the way her rage had cracked to reveal something else. Cauldron watched us like a director watching actors hit their marks. You think your threat protects you, he told her. Touch me again and you die. Touch you again and he dies. Such neat little lines to keep the world simple. He lifted his free hand and pointed at me. But he touched you anyway. He pointed at her. And you did not kill him. Seraphine's expression flickered, anger, then something dangerously close to fear. Cauldron stepped closer to the pit and raised his lantern. Let me show you, he said softly, what happens next. The lantern's light spilled downward into the pit, and this time the darkness did not swallow it. It reflected. A surface far below shimmered like black water. And in that reflection faces appeared. The missing. Dozens of them, pressed close together as if trapped behind glass. Eyes open. Mouths moving silently. I took a step forward before I could stop myself. Seraphine grabbed my arm again hard. Elias. I see them, I whispered, horrified. They're alive. Cauldron smiled. Alive enough. The faces in the pit turned as one. Toward me. Their mouths opened. And the choir spoke in 100 borrowed voices at once. Touch her again. My blood went cold. Cauldron's eyes glittered. You see? It understands leverage. Seraphine's grip on my arm tightened until it hurt. Her voice was low, shaking with fury. You will not use him, she snarled. Cauldron's smile softened into something almost pitying. Use? He repeated. My dear Seraphine. I am offering him the only thing he has ever wanted. He looked at me again. Would you like them back? He asked gently. The missing. The dead. The ones you couldn't save. Would you like to reach into the dark and pull them out? My throat constricted. The pit hummed with anticipation. Seraphine's gaze locked on mine, and for a moment she looked less like a queen and more like someone begging without words. Do not, she whispered. The choir sang. My sister's voice again. Eli, please. The chamber felt too small for my heartbeat. My hand trembled, not with fear of Cauldron, but with the sudden unbearable hope that there might be an answer to grief that didn't involve acceptance. Cauldron watched, patient. Go on, he murmured. Touch. Reach. Take what you deserve. Seraphine stepped closer to me, her face inches from mine, her eyes blazing. If you touch that pit, she said, voice breaking like ice, it will take you. And then it will wear you like a mask. I swallowed hard. Then I did something that surprised even me. I lowered my gun. Cauldron's smile widened, triumphant. But I didn't reach toward the pit. I reached toward Seraphine. Slowly. Carefully. My fingers brushed her wrist again. The leather glove. The cold beneath. Her eyes widened, not with rage this time, but with something like shock turned into pain. The choir's singing stuttered, confused. The faces in the pit flickered. Cauldron's expression tightened. What are you doing? I kept my gaze on Seraphine. I made a promise, I said. And in the moment my hand held her wrist again, grounding myself in the only real thing in that chamber, the choir's voices faltered, like it had lost the thread it was pulling. Seraphine's breath caught. I felt it then clearer than ever, that faint pulse inside her. Not fully alive, not fully dead. Interrupted. And I realized something terrifying and hopeful at once. The choir couldn't understand tenderness that wasn't a trap. It could mimic hunger. It could mimic love. It could mimic grief. But it couldn't predict a touch given without demand. Seraphine stared at my hand on her wrist as if it was a weapon she didn't know how to defend against. Cauldron's voice hardened. Release her. No, I said. The pit's reflection rippled. The missing faces trembled. Seraphine's free hand lifted, and for a second I thought she would strike Cauldron. Instead, she placed her palm against my chest, right over my heartbeat. It was cold enough to sting. And then she whispered, so low only I could hear. Stay with me. The words weren't a command. They were a request. Cauldron's lantern flared. Shadows lunged. The choir's singing rose into a shriek. And the cathedral, above us, groaned, stone settling, or something beneath it turning in its sleep. The first wave hit like pressure. Like the air itself decided to become water and drown us without changing form. The choir's shriek wasn't sound in the normal sense. It was a vibration that found every fear you'd ever hidden in your body and shook it awake. My vision blurred at the edges. The symbols around the pit seemed to rise off the stone, floating like notes escaping a page. Cauldron lifted his lantern higher, face lit from below, making him look less like a priest and more like a man wearing holiness as camouflage. You cannot defy it, he said, voice strained by the rising force. You cannot defy hunger. Seraphine's hand stayed on my chest. I could feel her fingers tremble, not from fear of Cauldron but from the choir's pull. The pit's air grabbed at us like invisible hands. I clenched my jaw and anchored myself in the only concrete sensation I had. Her wrist beneath my fingers, my heartbeat beneath her palm. Elias, she hissed, and her voice had changed. It wasn't queenly now. It was urgent, raw. If it pulls me, do not follow. If it pulls you, I replied through gritted teeth, I'm already holding you. Her eyes met mine. The crimson glow flared, then softened, like a fire responding to a hand held near it. Cauldron's lantern pulsed again and the pit answered. The black surface below swelled upward, as if the abyss were filling with something thick and alive. The missing faces rose with it, closer now, clearer. Their eyes were wide, pleading, accusing, empty. Their mouths formed words I couldn't hear, but my mind supplied them anyway. Help us. Save us. Join us. My sister's face appeared among them. Not as she'd looked when she died, pale in a hospital bed, but as she'd looked when she was 20 and laughing in summer sunlight. The choir knew exactly which image to use. Elias, the pit whispered in her voice, don't you want me back? My throat tightened. I tasted salt. I almost stepped forward. Seraphine's hand pressed harder against my chest, cold enough to burn. No, she snarled, not at me but at the pit. He is not yours. Cauldron's eyes narrowed. You think you can claim him? Seraphine's gaze snapped to Cauldron, and suddenly the queen returned, an ancient predator wearing fury like armor. I do not claim, she said, voice like a blade drawn slow. I choose. Then she did something I didn't expect. She turned fully toward me, still holding my chest, and leaned in until her forehead nearly touched mine. This will hurt, she whispered. Before I could ask, she sank her fangs into her own wrist. I felt her muscles tense as the fangs pierced skin. Dark blood welled, thicker than human blood, almost iridescent in the lantern's warped light. She pressed the bleeding wrist against my lips. My entire body recoiled instinctively. Drink, she commanded, and there was no softness in the word now. Or we die. Cauldron laughed, delighted. Ah, the old covenant. You are desperate. Seraphine's eyes burned. Be silent. I stared at the blood. Everything I knew, everything human, screamed that this was wrong. But the pit was rising. The choir's pull was strengthening. Cauldron's lantern was guiding it like a shepherd guides wolves. Seraphine's voice dropped, barely audible. I cannot fight it alone, she said. But if you carry my blood, it cannot lie to you so easily. It will still try, but you will feel the seams. Her blood touched my lips. Cold. Metallic. And beneath the metal, something like night-blooming flowers, something like lightning trapped in wine. I hesitated one heartbeat longer. Then I drank. The world tilted. Heat slammed through my veins so fast it felt like fire poured into my arteries. My senses sharpened violently, stone textures became painfully clear, the sound of Cauldron's breathing became loud as thunder, the pulse in the walls became a rhythm I could almost interpret. The choir's singing changed. It didn't get quieter. It got distinct. For the first time, I could hear the individual strands inside it, hundreds of voices layered, harmonizing badly, stitched together by one deeper note beneath them all. Core. A conductor. And in that core a thought. Feet. Not evil. Not malice. Just hunger stripped of morality older than language. My knees threatened to buckle. Seraphine gripped my collar with her free hand, holding me upright. Look at me, she ordered. I forced my gaze to hers. Her eyes were still glowing, but now I saw what lay behind the glow. Exhaustion. Fear. A strange tenderness so carefully controlled it looked like anger from a distance. Stay, she said again, softer. I'm here, I rasped. Cauldron's smile faltered when he saw me steady. You, he said sharply. What have you done? I wiped blood from my mouth. The taste lingered, electric. I learned to listen, I said. Then I turned toward the pit. The missing faces stared up, but now I could see the deception, the way their features wavered at the edges, the way the choir was sculpting them from my grief like clay. My sister's face looked perfect. Too perfect. I felt the seam Seraphine had promised. You're not her, I said, voice low but carrying. The choir's singing faltered, offended. Cauldron lifted his lantern again. Ignore him. He is intoxicated. But I could feel the lantern now. Its light was not light. It was instruction. A signal. A leash. And I could feel something else too. A thread running from Cauldron into the pit, thin but strong like a tether made of belief. He wasn't just feeding it victims. He was feeding it devotion. He stepped closer to the rim and spread his arms as if preaching to an unseen congregation. Blessed hunger, he intoned. Blessed silence. Blessed mouth beneath. Seraphine moved. She was faster than violence should be. One moment she stood beside me, the next she was across the chamber, her coat flaring like wings. Her hand struck Cauldron's lantern. It didn't shatter. It screamed. A high glassy sound that made my eyes water. The lantern's flame warped, then flared black. Cauldron staggered back, clutching it like it was his heart. You cannot take it, he hissed. Seraphine's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. Watch me. She grabbed the lantern with bare hands. Her skin smoked where it touched the metal, but she didn't flinch. She lifted the lantern high and slammed it into the stone rim of the pit. The lantern cracked. A tendril of shadow spilled out, writhing like a living thing. The choir shrieked. Cauldron screamed too, human this time, full of pain and panic. The tether between him and the pit snapped in my new senses like a string breaking. For a moment everything paused, the pit's rise, the faces, the singing, as if the choir had lost its rhythm. Then it surged violently, furious at being interrupted. The black surface below convulsed upward, forming something like a hand, massive, made of liquid darkness and reflected faces. It reached for Seraphine. Move! I shouted. But Seraphine didn't move back. She stepped closer to the rim. She opened her arms. And she looked down into the pit as if staring into a mirror she'd avoided for centuries. You want me, she said to it, voice steady. Take me then. But leave him. The darkness hesitated, almost confused. I realized then what she was doing. Offering herself. Again. Like she'd been offered before. Like she'd been made into a symbol before. My chest tightened with anger so sharp it tasted like blood. No, I said. Seraphine's head snapped toward me, eyes blazing. Elias. I moved. Not toward the pit, toward her. I grabbed her arm, pulling her back from the rim. The dark hand lunged anyway, closer now, its surface full of screaming faces. Seraphine snarled, fangs bared, ready to fight it barehanded. But the blood still burned in my veins, and with it came clarity. The choir wanted touch. It wanted contact. It wanted to complete itself through others. So I gave it what it wanted, on my terms. I stepped forward to the rim and slammed my palm onto the carved symbols. The stone was cold. The symbols vibrated under my skin like living wires. The choir's singing surged into me. My vision exploded with images. Cities drowned in darkness, stars collapsing, mouths opening in earth, people walking willingly into pits because hope had been dangled like bait. And in the center of it all, a presence, vast, blind, hungry. It tried to wrap around my mind like a cloak. I held on to one thought, one anchor. Seraphine's hand on my chest. Her request. Stay with me. I spoke into the pit, not in prayer, not in command, but in the only language hunger respected. Negotiation. You want a mouth, I said, voice shaking but loud. You want a body. You want to walk. The choir's voices hissed. Yes, yes, yes. Then I said, you can't have her. Pause. A ripple. What? Because I could feel it trying to tug toward Seraphine again, drawn to her interrupted life like a magnet. I swallowed and forced the words out. Because she's not yours, I said. And I'm not yours either. Cauldron staggered up behind us, clutching the broken lantern, eyes wild. Do not speak to it, he shouted. You don't know what you're inviting. I didn't look back. I stared into the abyss and felt it staring back. Then I made my offer. You want touch, I said. Take mine. But you give back what you took. You give back the missing. You close your mouth. You sleep. The choir laughed inside my skull again. No. It surged upward, the dark hand rising higher. Seraphine grabbed my coat from behind, trying to pull me back. But I didn't retreat. Because I finally understood what Cauldron had misunderstood. Hunger can be directed, yes. But not by domination. By sacrifice. Not the kind that destroys you. The kind that chooses what you will lose to save someone else. I lifted my hand from the symbols and reached into the darkness, just far enough for it to touch me. Cold flooded my arm. It felt like drowning in space. The choir's voices slammed into my mind. Give, give, give. I gritted my teeth. Take, I whispered. But take only what I offer. And then, like a knife sliding into flesh, it entered me. Not fully. Not possession. A tether. A thread of the choir wrapped around my wrist, where I'd touched Seraphine, trying to use that connection as a bridge to her. I tightened my grip on the thread with my will, with the burning vampire blood in my veins. No, I said through clenched teeth. Me. Seraphine's voice broke, furious and frightened. Elias, stop. Cauldron watched, horrified now. You'll destroy yourself. Maybe. But the pit's surface shuddered, and the missing faces flickered, trembling as if the choir's attention had been pulled. The dark hand recoiled slightly, adjusting its grip. For a moment, I felt it searching for a weakness. So I gave it one deliberately. I thought of my sister. Not the perfect image it had used. The real one. Her laugh, her flaws, the way she used to squeeze my wrist when she was scared. My throat tightened. Tears burned. The choir lunged for that grief, eager. I let it. And then I slammed the door behind it. I ripped the memory away from its grasp and replaced it with something else. Seraphine's touch on my chest, her whispered stay with me, the vulnerability she'd shown when I touched her wrist. The choir faltered. It did not understand this grief. It did not know how to weaponize it. The dark hand shook. The singing fractured. And in that fracture I shouted, now! Seraphine moved without hesitation. She grabbed the broken lantern, ignoring the smoke curling from her burned hands, and threw it into the pit. The lantern fell like a dying star. The choir screamed. The pit convulsed. The reflected faces shattered like glass. A gust of air surged upward, knocking all three of us back. I hit the stone floor hard, breath knocked out. Seraphine landed beside me, already rising, eyes scanning for threats. Cauldron fell to his knees, clutching his head, sobbing like a man waking from a dream and realizing what he'd done. The pit singing dropped into a low, wounded hum. And then silence. Not peaceful silence. A held breath. Seraphine crawled to the rim and peered down, cautious. Her eyes flickered, the crimson dimming. "It's closing," she whispered. I forced myself up, shaking. The symbols around the rim darkened, as if their ink were draining away. From the pit rose one last sound, not a choir now, but a single voice, ancient and exhausted. Not my sister. Not the missing. Not Seraphine. Something else. It spoke one word into the chamber, heavy as stone. Again. Then the pit sealed with a sound like a throat swallowing. The chamber went still. Only our breathing remained, mine ragged, Seraphine's controlled, Cauldron's broken. Seraphine turned to me slowly. Her eyes no longer glowed. In the absence of that supernatural light she looked younger. Not in age but in expression, less carved by fury. "What did you do?" she asked. I stared at my hands. The skin around my wrist was marked now, thin black lines like those symbols, faintly pulsing. "I touched it," I said hoarsely. And it touched back. Seraphine's gaze sharpened, fear returning. "You let it tether you." "I didn't let it have you," I said. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she reached out, slowly, carefully, and touched my marked wrist. The contact sent a faint vibration through the symbols, like a sleeping thing stirring. Her face tightened with something like guilt. "You should not have done that," she whispered. "I'm alive," I said. "For now," she replied, and the words carried the weight of centuries. Cauldron let out a choked laugh from the floor. "You think you won?" he rasped. "You think you closed it? You fed it, detective. You fed it yourself." I looked at him, anger cold and precise. "No," I said. "I starved it of the only thing it truly wanted." Cauldron blinked, confused. I stepped closer and crouched so he could see my eyes. "It wanted to turn her into a door," I said quietly. "And you wanted to be the one holding the key. But it didn't need you. It never did." Cauldron's face twisted. "It will open again." Seraphine's hand tightened around my wrist. "Yes," she said softly. "It will." I met her gaze. "Then we'll be ready," I said. Her eyes searched my face, looking for fear, for regret. I didn't offer either. Instead, I offered something else. The same calm, stubborn presence that had brought me into that alley, that had made me touch her wrist when she threatened death. Seraphine exhaled, slow, controlled. Then she nodded once. A queen's nod. A warrior's oath. "We leave," she said, "before the cathedral learns what happened beneath it." As we ascended the stairwell, the air grew lighter, but the mark on my wrist pulsed faintly with each heartbeat. The city above waited, unaware that something beneath its holy stones had been forced back into sleep. For now. Halfway up, Seraphine stopped at the landing where the candle had been. The niche was empty. No wax. No wick. As if it had never existed. Seraphine stared at the empty space, her expression unreadable. "It's watching," she murmured. I swallowed. "Then let it," I said. We emerged into the night behind the cathedral. The mist still curled through the streets, indifferent to what we'd done. But the moonlight looked sharper now, as if the sky itself had noticed a shift. Seraphine turned to leave. I caught her wrist again. Not to stop her. Just to remind her. Her eyes snapped to mine, instinctive warning flaring. Then the warning softened. She didn't threaten me this time. She simply said very quietly, "Do you understand what you've bound yourself to?" I looked down at the black symbols on my wrist. "I bound myself to the fight," I said. Her gaze held mine. "And to me?" she asked, almost like it hurt to say it. I could have joked. I could have dodged. Instead, I answered honestly. "I chose you the moment you didn't kill me," I said. "Everything after that is just truth catching up." For a heartbeat, she looked like she might step closer. Then footsteps echoed from the street. Human footsteps. Multiple, purposeful. Seraphine's body tensed. I turned and saw them. Police, and not just any police. Tactical units. Dark uniforms. Rifles. Flashlights cutting through mist. And at the front, a familiar face. Captain Mara Vance. My former superior. The woman who'd warned me to stop digging into missing person cases that smelled like myth. She raised her flashlight, illuminating us. Me and Seraphine standing close enough to look guilty. Her eyes locked onto Seraphine. Then onto the mark on my wrist. Her jaw tightened. "Elias," she called, voice cold. "Step away from her." I didn't move. Seraphine's eyes glowed faintly again, Not rage this time, but readiness. Vance's men fanned out, rifles trained. You've been compromised, Vance said. Whatever that thing is, it's got its claws in you. Seraphine's lips curled. Thing, she echoed softly, amused and deadly. I raised my hands slightly, not surrender, just a gesture to keep the rifles from firing. Mara, I said, listen to me. The missing are above your clearance, she cut in. And you're done. Behind Vance, I saw a figure in the shadows near the cathedral steps, a priest watching. Not Cauldron. Another one. Younger. Clean-faced. Smiling faintly. He met my gaze and nodded almost imperceptibly, like we shared a secret. My blood chilled. The system, Seraphine had said. Not one servant. A city. Vance took a step closer. Last warning, she said. Step away. Seraphine leaned toward me, voice barely audible. They will kill you, she whispered. Or worse. They will cage you and study you. I stared at Vance's hard eyes. Then I looked at Seraphine. And I made a decision that felt like stepping off a roof and trusting the air to become a bridge. I took Seraphine's hand fully this time, not just her wrist. Her fingers were cold, but they curled around mine. The shock on her face was brief and unmistakably human. Vance's men shouted, rifles lifting higher. But before anyone fired, the mark on my wrist pulsed violently. The air around us vibrated. The mist surged upward, swirling into a sudden thick wall between us and the guns. Seraphine's eyes widened. That's not me, she whispered. The choir. Even sealed, it could still reach through the tether. Not enough to open. Enough to warn. Enough to remind us it hadn't forgotten. Vance's flashlight beam vanished in the mist. Her voice came muffled. Elias, what the hell did you do? I squeezed Seraphine's hand. Run, I said. And we did. We sprinted into the night, slipping through alleys and shadowed streets as the city's sirens began to wake. The mist chased us like a living thing, concealing and guiding as if the darkness itself had chosen a side, or simply enjoyed the chaos. We didn't stop until we reached the river that cut Vesperglass in two, black water reflecting the moon like a broken mirror. We stood beneath a bridge, catching breath. Seraphine leaned against a stone pillar, eyes closed for a moment as if steadying herself. I flexed my marked wrist. The symbols had dimmed, but they remained. A reminder. A leash. A promise with teeth. Seraphine opened her eyes and looked at me with a mixture of anger and something softer she didn't want to name. You touched me again, she said. I did, I replied. And you didn't die. I exhaled. Not yet. She stared at our joined hands. Do you know what happens now? She asked quietly. I looked out at the river, at the city lights trembling on the water like nervous stars. The system will come for us, I said. The choir will try to open again. Cauldron was only one branch. Seraphine nodded, grim. And you, she added, are tethered to something that doesn't forgive. I swallowed. Then we don't give it the chance, I said. Seraphine was silent for a long time. Then she lifted our joined hands to her lips, not to bite, not to threaten. To press a single brief kiss against the back of my hand. Cold, soft, almost reverent. It was not romance in the clean, easy way humans tell stories. It was a vow made in the language of monsters and survivors. I will not waste what you risked. She lowered my hand again. Touch me again, she murmured, voice barely a breath, and you live. I blinked, surprised. A faint, real smile, small as dawn, touched her mouth. Because, she continued, eyes steady on mine, I will not let the world take you. The river moved beneath us, dark and endless. Above, the city continued pretending it was safe. And somewhere far below St. Maro's Cathedral, something hungry shifted in its sleep, whispering the word it had left us with. Again. But this time, when it woke, it wouldn't find Seraphine alone in the dark. It would find us. Together. And in the simplest act that had started it all, one fearless touch against a threatened wrist, the story promised what the night had tried to deny. That sometimes the next thing you expect isn't death. Sometimes it's war. Sometimes it's redemption. Sometimes it's a monster choosing to be human for one person, and a human choosing to be brave enough to deserve it. And sometimes, under cold moonlight and heavy mist, the most dangerous threat becomes the beginning of a promise. In Vesperglass, morning never arrives like forgiveness. It arrives like an inspection, gray light pressing against windows, revealing the grime you've been able to pretend was atmosphere. The river under the bridge moved with the slow confidence of something that had seen cities born and rot and be renamed, and the mist clung to the stone like it was trying to overhear us. My wrist wouldn't stop aching. Not a clean ache like a bruise. A living ache, periodic, rhythmic, almost thoughtful. The black sigils weren't ink anymore. They were behavior. They tightened when my breathing quickened. They warmed when my pulse spiked. They pulsed when Seraphine stood too close. She watched the mark with a predator's stillness, the kind of focus that meant she'd already imagined 10 ways it could kill me and 3 ways it could kill her. Her eyes were dim now, no crimson flares, no theatrical glow, just the flat, watchful intensity of someone who had learned the hard way that miracles always send invoices. "You're hearing it," she said quietly. I swallowed. The choir. Seraphine didn't answer immediately. She looked past me toward the cathedral spires in the distance. St. Maro's rose out of the fog like a clenched fist, pretending to bless the city while it hid a mouth underneath. "Yes," she finally said. "But it's not singing." I frowned. "It's, what then?" Seraphine's gaze snapped back to my wrist. "Listening." The word landed wrong. A buried intelligence that fed on people, that wore grief like perfume. Listening felt too patient, too strategic. Hunger should be frantic. Hunger should be loud. And yet the mark confirmed it. A faint hum behind my teeth, subtle as tinnitus, changing pitch when my thoughts wandered too near certain memories. I stared at the sigils. "So I'm a microphone." Seraphine's mouth tightened. "You're a doorbell." I tried to laugh but the sound died in my throat. "How do I turn it off?" She didn't blink. "You don't. Not by willpower. Not by denial." I pulled my sleeve down over the mark as if cloth could mute something that lived under my skin. "Then what?" Seraphine stepped closer, not touching, not yet, close enough that I felt the cold of her presence sharpen the air. "We find out what it does before it decides to do it at the worst possible time." The river shifted beneath us. A distant siren rose and fell, like the city exhaling pain in measured intervals. Somewhere above, commuters would be opening shops, flipping signs, arguing over coffee, unaware that the line between myth and infrastructure had thinned overnight. I looked at Seraphine. "You said it borrows mouths." She nodded. "And hands?" I said. Her gaze narrowed. "Yes." "And now," I lifted my wrist, watching the faint pulse. "It borrows me." Seraphine's expression flickered, something like guilt threatening to surface, then hardened into command again. "Come. We can't stay in open air. Not with your scent changed." "What do you mean changed?" She didn't answer with words. She just leaned in almost imperceptibly and inhaled near my neck. Not a romantic gesture. A diagnostic one. Her eyes sharpened. "You smell like a threshold." A chill crawled across my scalp. We left the bridge and moved through back streets where the fog sat in corners like squatters. Seraphine walked with the quiet certainty of someone who could disappear if she wanted. I followed with the clumsier confidence of a man trying not to look like prey. But the mark kept pulsing. Like it was excited to be outside. Like it was learning the city. Seraphine's refuge wasn't a castle or a crypt. It was a riverside warehouse with boarded windows and a generator that hummed like a restrained animal. Inside, the air smelled of iron, dust, and old rain trapped in wood. She kept the lights low, not because she feared brightness but because light makes you feel safe and she couldn't afford safety. On a metal table she laid out a small array of objects. A black metal dagger, a glass vial, and an antique compass whose needle refused to commit to north. It twitched, circled, then pointed, not to geography but to intent. "What is all this?" I asked. "Alignment tools," Seraphine said. "Your mark is a tuning instrument. We test what it resonates with. Like a Geiger counter for nightmares. Like a key that keeps trying locks," she corrected. She reached for my wrist. Instinct made me flinch. Not from fear of her, something worse. From the idea that touching my mark might touch something else back. Seraphine noticed and paused. Her voice softened by a single degree. "I won't hurt you." "I know," I said. Then quieter, "I don't know what it will do." She nodded once like that was the most honest thing I'd said all night. Her fingers settled against the sigils. Cold met heatless heat. The mark pulsed. And reality slipped. For a moment I wasn't in the warehouse. I stood in a stone corridor beneath St. Maro's, the same corridor lined with sealed doors bearing bishops' names. Only this time the walls looked wet, sweating in the dark. At the far end, a new door waited, not ancient stone but modern steel with a biometric scanner glowing faintly. From behind that door a voice spoke. "Captain Mara Vance." "Crow," she said, her tone precise and controlled, "tell me who you're with." My stomach dropped. This wasn't a memory. It didn't have the fuzziness of recall. It had the crisp cruelty of now. Seraphine's voice came from very far away, muffled, like she was shouting through water. Elias, come back. I blinked. The warehouse snapped into place around me again. My breath came out hard. And in my hand, impossible, heavy with real texture, sat a small object. A police body cam memory card. I stared at it as if it might bite. Seraphine froze. Where did you get that? My tongue felt thick. I was in a corridor. There was a door. And then, I placed the card on the table. Plastic scraped metal. The sound was so normal it felt obscene. Seraphine didn't touch it. She just watched it like it was contaminated. Your mark just did something I prayed it wouldn't. What? I asked, voice hoarse. Did it do? She swallowed. It gave you borrowed touch. I frowned. Meaning? When you touched the network, she said, choosing each word like it could explode, you took something from it. You pulled an object across distance the way the choir pulls people across fear. A sick understanding spread through me. So I can steal evidence. Seraphine's eyes hardened. And every time you do, it learns your grip. I looked down at my wrist. The sigils were darker now, more defined, as if feeding on the act. What's the cost? I asked. Seraphine's answer was immediate. You. Not metaphorical. Not poetic. Just the blunt truth that made my ribs feel too tight. It maps your mind, she continued. Your grief, your love, your rage. It learns what to imitate next time. I forced a breath. Then we don't let it imitate anything. Seraphine's expression sharpened with something like pity. Elias, it doesn't need permission. She lifted the compass. The needle spun once, then settled, pointing toward the cathedral. Then it twitched again, pointing toward police headquarters. Seraphine's jaw clenched. 2 nodes. 2 feeding points. The system is wider than we thought. I stared at the memory card like it was a message from a future I didn't want. Then we use what I can pull, I said. We use it before it uses me. Seraphine's gaze held mine for a long moment. Then she said quietly, if you insist on becoming a weapon, you learn to be sheathed when necessary. Meaning? Meaning you don't panic, she said. Because panic is a handle it can grab. Right on cue, the mark pulsed. As if it enjoyed being mentioned. We loaded the card. The footage was grainy, body cam POV, flashlights cutting through underground stone, tactical boots, clipped orders. Then a glimpse of the pit, only a second, followed by static that sounded too much like distant singing. And in the last half second, a whisper threaded through the audio like a blade sliding under a door. Again. Seraphine snapped the laptop shut as if sound could infect circuitry. They're going back down there, I said. Vance. And a priest, young, clean-faced. He was there. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. The smiling one. You know him? I know the type, she said. A believer who thinks he's a scientist. Before I could speak again, headlights spilled through the warehouse's cracks. An engine died outside with a deliberate quiet. Not a civilian stopping by mistake. Not curiosity. A decision. Seraphine went still, half melting into shadow. I moved to the window and looked out. Captain Mara Vance stepped from an unmarked SUV. She wasn't alone. A civilian-looking woman followed. Fit, trained, eyes like sharpened glass. In her hand was a small silver case. They didn't knock. They entered like they owned the air. Vance raised both hands, calm and practiced. Elias, I'm not here to arrest you. My gun came up anyway. Then what are you here for? Her gaze went straight to my wrist. The mark pulsed in response like recognition. Vance's jaw tightened. You're tethered. Seraphine's voice slid from the darkness, low and lethal. Say what you really mean. Vance's eyes flicked toward Seraphine, but she didn't flinch. If anything, she looked prepared. The civilian woman opened the silver case. Inside sat a sleek syringe gun and a vial of dark liquid. Vance spoke carefully. We have a suppressant. It can dampen the mark's activity, reduce the hum, slow the resonance. Keep you functional. Seraphine stepped forward, fully visible now, eyes faintly glowing. Or it can kill him. It won't, Vance said. It stabilizes. And stabilizes him for what? Seraphine asked, voice like ice. Vance didn't lie. She just looked at me and said, to use you. The warehouse felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls leaned in to hear the confession. You can pull objects from the choir's network, Vance continued. We can't. You can locate nodes. You can identify agents. You can navigate. Seraphine's laugh was humorless. So the commission still exists. Vance's face hardened. Yes. Seraphine's voice dropped. Then you already know what you did to me. The civilian woman's eyes flickered, an involuntary tell. Vance held her composure, but something in her expression tightened, as if Seraphine had named a crime in a room full of people pretending it was policy. I looked between them. The commission is using the choir. Vance shook her head. Containing it. And if containment requires sacrifices? Seraphine asked. Vance's silence was answer enough. The word sacrifices hit me like a match. My pulse spiked. The mark pulsed, hard, painful, like it liked the heat of my fear. The hum in my skull rose instantly. Then the new effect snapped into place. My hand lifted toward the silver case without my permission. Not full possession, something worse. A cooperative hijack like the mark had learned how to ride the reflex between thought and action. Vance's eyes widened. See? It wants the suppressant. My fingertips touched the case. And the case vanished. Gone. In the same instant, something else appeared in my palm. A wet black feather, dripping a darkness that didn't reflect light. Seraphine went rigid. Vance stumbled a step back, genuinely shaken. The feather pulsed softly, like a heartbeat in dead matter. What is that? I asked, voice thin. Seraphine's answer came out like a curse. A messenger feather. I stared at her. The choir has messengers? Her eyes stayed on the feather. Every god has angels. The hum in my skull changed pitch, less hungry, more directive. Not a swarm. A signal. A sentence pressed itself into my mind, clear as spoken words. Bring her. I flinched. Seraphine saw it in my face. Elias, what did you hear? I swallowed. An instruction. Vance's expression sharpened into grim confirmation. You're becoming a conduit. Seraphine stepped in close, seized my wrist and forced my eyes to hers. Stay with me, she said, low and urgent. The hum dimmed slightly, like a predator backing off when it realizes the prey is guarded. Vance lowered the syringe gun, her voice quieter now. If you don't come with us, Elias, we'll come for you. Next time we won't ask. Seraphine's gaze burned. Get out. Vance hesitated, then retreated, never taking her eyes off my wrist until the door shut. The warehouse fell silent except for the generator's hum. I opened my fist slowly. The feather lay there, wet and alive with wrongness. And my mark pulsed as if pleased with itself. Seraphine didn't touch the feather. She made me drop it into a sealed glass jar like it was radioactive. When the lid screwed tight, the feather still moved, barely, like something inside it was testing the walls. The mark stole that on purpose, Seraphine said. No, I replied, staring at my wrist. It swapped. Seraphine's gaze cut to mine. That is worse. I wanted to argue, but the hum rose again, threading through my thoughts like wire. Bring her, it repeated, not like hunger, like orders. Seraphine watched my expression and understood. It's talking to you. I nodded, throat tight. Not singing. Not mimicking. Direct instructions. She went very still. From the choir? I hesitated. The voice didn't feel like the pit. It didn't feel like raw appetite. It felt structured. Like something that had a plan and a timeline. Maybe not the choir, I said slowly. Maybe something that serves it. Seraphine's lips parted as if she might deny it. Then she whispered, a herald. The word carried weight. Old weight, the kind that comes from stories told in whispers because speaking them too loudly might summon the thing itself. What is a herald? I asked. Seraphine looked away as if the answer existed somewhere she didn't want to look. A messenger that isn't trapped underground. A courier between the buried hunger and the living city. My pulse thudded. So the pit being sealed doesn't end the problem. Seraphine's expression turned bleak. It means the problem has changed tactics. The mark pulsed again, harder. My vision blurred. And suddenly, without warning, the warehouse wasn't a warehouse anymore. I stood in a white, sterile room, harsh fluorescent light buzzing overhead. A metal table dominated the center. Straps lay open like tongues waiting to taste skin. On the table, Seraphine. Her wrists bound. Her throat exposed. Her eyes glowing with contained fury. Behind a glass wall, silhouettes in suits. Clipboards. Calm voices. And at the edge of the scene, Captain Vance, younger, watching with the same controlled expression. A voice spoke from my own mouth, my voice but wrong, hollowed by something else. Touch her again and you die. The sentence wasn't a threat. It was a protocol. I gasped and snapped back into the warehouse, stumbling, heart hammering. Seraphine was in front of me instantly, hands on my shoulders. Elias, what did you see? I fought for breath. A memory. Her eyes widened. Mine? I shook my head. Not yours. Not mine. Something possible. A future the Mark remembers before it happens. Seraphine's grip tightened. That's impossible. The hum rose, almost amused. Then another flash hit me, shorter, sharper. St. Maro's corridor. The modern steel door. The clean-faced priest smiling. A hand placing a fresh candle in a niche where no candle should burn. Then darkness. I blinked rapidly, forcing myself to stay anchored in the present. Seraphine's voice was low, urgent. The Mark isn't just tether. It's reconnaissance. I swallowed. It remembers what hasn't happened. Her eyes narrowed as understanding assembled itself like armor. It's rehearsing. I stared at my wrist. For what? Seraphine looked toward the sealed jar holding the feather. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. For the moment it opens again. And then she said something that made my blood go colder than her touch ever could. And when it opens again, it won't need the pit. I felt my throat tighten. Because it'll use me. Seraphine didn't deny it. She just said, because it will try. The hum changed pitch again, becoming almost tender, mocking tenderness, the kind a predator offers prey right before it bites. A final instruction pressed into my mind, clearer than the first. Bring her to the bell tower. I froze. Seraphine read the panic in my face. Where? I forced the words out. St. Maro's. The bell tower. Seraphine's eyes flared crimson for the first time in hours. No. It wasn't a suggestion, I whispered. Seraphine grabbed my wrist, hard enough to hurt, and stared at the sigils. Then we cut it off. She reached for the black metal dagger. I yanked back instinctively. No. If you cut the tether wrong, you might open it through the wound. Seraphine's jaw clenched. Then what do we do? I stared at the sealed jar, the feather twitching inside. And I realized something with a sudden, nauseating clarity. The Mark wasn't only receiving instructions. It was also broadcasting. Because as I looked at Seraphine, really looked, my wrist flared hotter and the hum aligned into something like a coordinate. Not a direction on a map. A direction in desire. I could feel, with horrifying intimacy, how the network saw her. Not as a person, not as a queen, but as a key-shaped hunger it had been waiting to fit into a lock. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. Elias, what are you feeling? I swallowed hard. It's tracking you through me. Her expression broke for a fraction of a second, pure old fear. Then she steadied. Then we make it chase the wrong thing, she said. How? Seraphine's gaze dropped to my wrist, then rose to meet my eyes. You let it believe you're going to obey. My heart kicked. You want me to walk into St. Maro's. I want you to pretend, she said, voice fierce. So we can find the herald. The generator hummed. The fog outside pressed against the glass like an audience. I looked at her, and despite everything, despite the commission, despite the choir, despite the Mark carving instructions into my nerves, I trusted her. Because the first time I touched her wrist, she could have killed me. And she didn't. That was the only proof of freedom either of us had. I nodded once. Okay. We pretend. Seraphine's eyes softened, only for a moment, then hardened again into war. Then we move, she said. Before the bell rings. We moved through Vesper glass like fugitives inside a dream that had decided to become real. Seraphine kept the shadows, but she didn't hide from me. She stayed close enough that her presence dampened the hum in my skull, like her will could interfere with the signal. The closer we got to St. Maro's, the stronger the Mark pulsed. It wasn't pain anymore. It was anticipation. As if the city itself were counting down. We reached the cathedral's side yard, where dead leaves collected in piles like forgotten prayers. The bell tower rose above us, a tall stone throat ready to sing to the city. The windows near the top glowed faintly, not with electric light but with candlelight. Fresh candles. My stomach tightened. Seraphine's gaze tracked upward. Someone is already there. I swallowed. The herald. The hum rose in my skull, and the instruction returned, almost gentle. Bring her. Seraphine's fingers brushed my sleeve, not quite a touch, more like a reminder. Stay. We slipped inside through a service door Seraphine seemed to know by instinct, then up narrow stairwells that smelled of dust and old incense. Each step made the hum clearer. Each landing made the Mark warmer. Halfway up, we passed a niche in the wall. A candle burned there. The flame did not flicker. Seraphine stopped, staring at it with a hatred so pure it looked like worship turned inside out. It's guiding us, she whispered. Or welcoming, I said. We continued. At the top of the bell tower, the air changed, colder, thinner, tasting faintly of metal. The bell hung above, massive and dark, its surface etched with symbols that looked uncomfortably similar to the ones on my wrist. Seraphine's eyes widened slightly. Those markings. They match, I said, voice dry. A figure stood near the bell's base, back turned to us, hands clasped behind him like a man waiting for choir practice to begin. He turned slowly. The clean-faced priest. Young. Come. Smiling faintly. The same smile I'd seen on the cathedral steps. Detective Crow, he said warmly. And Seraphine. Thank you for coming. Seraphine stepped forward, eyes glowing. Who are you? The priest's smile sharpened, not cruel, just pleased. A messenger. My mark pulsed violently. The hum aligned into a single note so pure it made my teeth ache. The priest looked at my wrist as if admiring craftsmanship. Ah, it took well. Seraphine's voice was a growl. Stop talking. He lifted one hand, palm outward, not a defensive gesture. A blessing. I'm not here to fight, he said. I'm here to deliver. Deliver what? I demanded. His eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something behind the smile. Something vast and old peering through a human face like it was a window. A correction, he said softly. Your story ended too neatly. The bell above us shifted slightly, without wind, without touch. Just a subtle movement like a throat clearing before speech. Seraphine's posture tightened. Elias. Back. But my mark burned. And my arm lifted, again toward Seraphine. Not to hold her wrist gently this time. To present her. My hand trembled, caught between my will and the mark's directive. No, I snarled through clenched teeth, fighting my own nerves. The priest watched with mild curiosity, like a scientist observing an experiment's predictable struggle. Don't resist, he said. Resistance is a kind of invitation. Seraphine moved fast, she grabbed my forearm trying to pin it down. The instant she touched me, the mark flared like a wound opening. The bell rang. Not from a swing. From inside the metal. A single, deafening note that didn't travel outward into the city so much as travel inward. Into bone, into memory, into blood. The tower walls shimmered. The air thickened. And below the bell, in the stone floor, a thin line appeared, like a crack forming in marble. Then another. Then a circle. A mouth outline. Seraphine's eyes widened. It's opening here. The priest's smile widened just enough to show teeth that were too perfect. Of course, he whispered. Did you really think it needed the pit again? The crack circle in the floor widened, revealing darkness that wasn't empty, darkness that looked wet, reflective, crowded. Faces pressed upward. The missing. My sister's face among them. The choir's hum surged like a tide. My wrist mark blazed. And then, worst of all, Seraphine's expression changed. Not into rage. Into recognition. Because in the darkness below, something rose, not a hand, not a shadow, but a figure shaped like a person. Tall, pale, black-haired. Wearing a coat the color of spilled wine. Eyes glowing crimson. It looked up at us. And it smiled with Seraphine's mouth. Seraphine staggered back as if struck. No, she whispered. The priest's voice was almost tender. Your image was always the easiest mask. The thing in the opening spoke in Seraphine's voice, perfectly, intimately, like it had been practicing for centuries. Touch me again, it purred, and you live. And my body, my traitorous tethered body, took one step forward toward it before I could stop. Seraphine grabbed me, screaming my name. The bell rang a second time. And the mouth beneath us opened wider. The bell's second note didn't fade. It stayed, vibrating in Elias's bones like a command trying to become a muscle memory. The floor mouth widened, exhaling cold that smelled of wet stone and old names, and the thing wearing Seraphine's face rose higher, too smooth, too perfect, like a portrait that had learned how to blink. Elias fought his own arm as it reached forward, not with tenderness this time but with presentation, an offering gesture the mark wanted to complete. Seraphine's grip on him was brutal and desperate, her nails biting through his sleeve as she tried to anchor him to the present. Stay with me, she hissed again, but now the words sounded less like comfort and more like a rope thrown to a drowning man. The herald smiled as if he'd been waiting for that exact sentence. Beautiful, he murmured. Even your resistance serves the ritual. Touch is all it has ever wanted. Seraphine's eyes flashed crimson, pure war. She didn't lunge at the herald. She lunged at the bell. In a blink she was beneath it, palms pressed to the sigils carved into its metal skin. The bell's markings responded to her like a lock recognizing the key it was forged for. For a heartbeat the tower filled with a pressure so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. "Elias," she shouted. "Your wrist, match it. Match the pattern. Now." He didn't understand how he understood, but the mark did. The sigils on his wrist flared, echoing the bell's carvings, and suddenly he could see the network not as visions, but as geometry. Lines of resonance, loops of influence, knots of hunger. The mouth in the floor wasn't a random opening. It was a tuned instrument. The choir wasn't forcing a door open. It was being invited through a perfect chord. Elias slammed his marked wrist against the bell's lowest etched ring. Pain detonated up his arm, a bright white pain that felt like the mark trying to tear free. The bell screamed, metal protesting, reality protesting. The herald's smile finally cracked. "No," the herald said, voice sharpening into something inhuman. "That's not how it's done." But Elias had learned the only rule that mattered. Systems break at their joints. He didn't try to overpower the choir. He didn't try to outsing it. He did something uglier and simpler. He detuned it. He forced his own heartbeat into the pattern, off by just enough to ruin the harmony. The bell rang a third time. Wrong. Sour. Human. The mouth in the floor spasmed, the darkness below rippling as the doppelganger's smile faltered. The missing faces pressed upward, screaming without sound, then flickering like bad film as the resonance collapsed. Seraphine's hand smoked against the bell, but she didn't let go. Her voice, ancient and furious, cut through the vibration. "Not my face," she snarled. "Not my mouth. Not my name." The doppelganger reached up, desperate now, its fingers made of reflected grief. It almost touched Elias's boot, and then the opening sealed like a wound cauterized by lightning. Stone knit shut. The candle flames in the tower guttered. The hum in Elias's skull dropped from a command into a thin, wounded hiss, furious, retreating. The herald stumbled back as if the air itself had slapped him. For the first time he looked afraid. "You think you ended it," he whispered, voice trembling with a hatred that finally sounded honest. "You only changed the address." Seraphine turned on him, eyes blazing. "You're not a priest," she said. The herald's smile returned, but it was smaller now, strained. "I was never meant to be," he answered. "I'm what the city grows when it needs permission to do evil politely." Elias raised his gun, not because bullets could kill a messenger of hunger, but because sometimes a gesture is a promise. "Tell your choir," Elias said hoarsely, "it doesn't get her." The herald's gaze slid to Elias's wrist. The sigils were still there but altered, less like a brand, more like a scar that had learned to bite back. "Oh, detective," the herald said softly. "It already has you." Then he stepped backward into the shadow behind the bell and simply vanished. No smoke. No flash. Just absence, as if reality blinked and forgot to render him. Silence settled hard. Seraphine sagged for the first time, her shoulders dipping as if she'd been holding up the entire tower with will alone. Elias caught her elbow, steadying, not claiming. She allowed it, and that permission felt like the most fragile victory of the night. Outside the bell tower windows, Vesper Glass continued breathing, cars moving, distant voices, a city pretending it hadn't almost become a throat. Elias looked at his wrist. The mark pulsed once, faintly, like a heartbeat learning a new rhythm. Seraphine followed his gaze. "It's still there," he said. "Yes," she replied. "But now it knows you can hurt it." Elias's laugh was dry, exhausted. "So what now?" Seraphine looked out toward the cathedral's dark spires and the river beyond, her expression hardening into something that wasn't quite hope, but was close enough to stand beside it. "Now," she said, "we hunt the joints. We break the system that keeps giving it mouths. We burn its permissions. And we do it before it learns a better song." Elias nodded, then very gently took her hand. This time she didn't threaten him. She squeezed back once, small, real, human. And somewhere deep beneath Vesper Glass, something hungry shifted in its sleep, realizing the prey had learned how to bite. Not the end, but the beginning of a war told in touches, scars, and the terrible miracle of choosing each other anyway.
Some stories look like they're about monsters, but they are really about boundaries. Who gets to touch your life, your fear, your body, your future? Elias didn't survive because he was fearless. He survived because he refused to let hunger define what love is supposed to mean. And he refused to let a system convince him that necessary sacrifices are ever truly necessary. If you are carrying a marked trauma, grief, guilt, a past that keeps humming in your skull, remember this. You may not control what happened to you, but you can control what you become because of it. You can learn the pattern, detune the song, and choose the kind of touch that heals instead of the kind that takes. And if the world ever tells you that tenderness is weakness, let that be the moment you prove it wrong.